This is a really nice opportunity for one of the members of the South Brevard Historical Society Board to do the presentation for you. I think if you saw the article in the paper, he was born in Flavette. If any of you were University of Florida graduates, that was where the veterans all lived. And so he's a native Gator. There aren't many of them that are born there like that. He's a med tech here in town. He's from Melbourne Beach, and his family is here and has grown up here. And we're really fortunate to have him on our board, and very fortunate to have him today do the presentation on the Japanese colony in Eau Gallie. So I give you Sandy Wilson.
I'm Sandy Wilson, and I'm not Japanese, but you might want to know why I got myself involved in this type of program. Ms. Briel mentioned I was born in Gainesville, Florida, while my dad was going to the University of Florida. And in 1960, they opened up a medical school. And my dad was in the first class, and he was in the first class with one of the people that I'm going to be talking about today, Charlie Ozaki, who is one of the members of the farm. My dad always said that, you know, he's the one that talked Charlie into going into the medical school and applying for it, because Charlie had gotten his bachelor's degree at the University of Florida, went into the service, used the GI Bill to come back, went to Ohio State, got a master's degree in soil chemistry and a PhD in soil chemistry. Then he came back to the University of Florida, and they sent him out to Belle Glade. There's an agricultural extension station out there. That extension station was being run by one of my dad's best friends. His name was Dalton Harrison, and my dad was visiting him, and Charlie comes walking in the door, and they were talking, and he said that, you know, he didn't really like the agricultural extension job, and so my dad said, well, why don't you apply to the University of Florida Medical School? They're going to have a class, you know, starting in 1956, I believe, is when it started. And he did. And my dad also, you know, applied, and they both got in. Here you see my dad right there. This was Charlie Ozaki right there. This is on their graduation day from medical school at the University of Florida in 1960. This guy right here is me. All right, and that guy right there is my brother Tom. So anyway, I got to know, Charlie and my dad became close friends. And all through medical school, they were, you know, very much friends with each other. There we go. Now we're going. And I got to know him, and all through my dad's life. My dad died in 2007. Charlie's still living. They remain close friends. So anyway, that's why I got involved with it. When I moved down to Brevard County, my dad said, you know, you need to talk to Charlie Ozaki, because he lived in Brevard County, and he grew up on a farm here, and he really, really had a hard upbringing, and you need to hear the story. I finally got around to it, all right? This is back in 1984. So that's 1960 right there. There we all are. You can see them. They're wearing their graduation things. This was taken at Flavette 2 in Gainesville. Florida Veteran Housing was mentioned in the opening statement. I lived there for 15 years while my dad went to school. He went to school forever. And I probably set the record of living in this place. And let me tell you, you guys ever been to Melbourne Village? And have you seen that building that they call a rec center there? That's a Flavette building right there. That is one. It's the same thing. They got it from the same place, which is in Stark at Camp Blanding, and they made us live in there. Okay, here's the class. There's Charlie. This is the yearbook photo. It's cropped in half. There was another bunch of them. There were 50 in the first class. Yep, there they are right over there. If anybody wants to come by and take a look, that's the original one that sat in my dad's office for 50 years. And now I've got it. Okay, on to the story. How did they get out there? How did these Japanese people get out there? Well, it all starts with a guy named Henry Flagler, we all know. He'd started everything in Florida, right? He ran this railroad down the east coast of Florida. and eventually out to Key West. Well, at the time, there were very few people living along the railroads, and so he did everything he could possibly do to try to get people to move to Florida, and he created a subsidiary of the railroad, of the Florida East Coast Railroad. It was called the Model Land Company, and the Model Land Company's task was to try to recruit people to move along the tracks and live along the tracks of the railroad, so somebody would be using the thing. So this guy, who was educated in New York City, he was a Japanese native and had supposedly had some kind of royal ties, was Joe Sakai. He spoke English, he read English. He met with the people in Jacksonville. That seemed to be the home base before St. Augustine sort of became the home base for Florida East Coast. And he offered them that he would go to Japan, talk to some young men there that were the crack farmers of the Japanese culture. They were supposed to be much more the superior farmers there. Remember, Florida was a swampland for the most part. And he would bring them back, and they would buy land if it was sold to them cheap enough. And so they thought, the governor of Florida thought, this is a great idea. The people in Washington, this is a great idea. And Henry Flagler, great idea. So he goes back to Japan, and he comes back with this recruited bunch. And the first bunch moves to there. And that is down in Delray Beach, Boca Raton. Anybody know where Florida Atlantic University is? Sitting right on top of that property right there. That's where Florida Atlantic got the property, because the state took it back from the Japanese in about 1948. You can see there's a horse there. There's a bunch of Japanese people there, because that's about all that lived at Yamato. Yamato was a name for ancient Japan that meant peaceful country. And he brought over at the beginning about 16 males, unmarried males, and they lived along there. Sakai eventually does move there, but he continues to go out and recruit people. Amongst those people that are in that early settlement are a man named, well, he went by Eddie, that was his American name, but it was Minoru Ohi, O-H-I. And he was one of the first group of guys that went there. Now, somehow Mr. Ohi, I read where he was everywhere. So I don't know how this guy got around so much, but he was right next to the train, so he rode the train. And speaking of the train, the guys rode the cross-continental railway down and hooked up with Flagler's line and came down like that. That's how they got over to where they were. Now, Sakai had also proposed two other sites. Not only was he going to do the Boca Raton site at Yamato, but he had eyes on one in Orange Park. So 1903, Sakai gets this thing going. About 1904, they're at Yamato. They're starting to clear the land. They're going to plant pineapples, which they do. They have a banner crop the first year. They make a lot of money. Everybody in California, no Asian could own land in California. It was against the law. But in Florida, here, now look what happened. They're practically giving them away, giving land to them. So Sakai is writing back. Sakai, had contacts back there. He was some kind of big shot in Japan. And he's writing back to newspapers. They're exclaiming all the success that they're having at Yamato. Well, that just brought them on, They're all moving over here now. And so the next settlement was in Orange Park. And that's when we get to this family, the Ozakis. Now remember, that's the family I know, so you're going to hear a lot about them. Don't know much about the other two families, but I will tell you what I did find out. But because I knew Charlie, I could ask Charlie. Anyway, Yamato, that's it right there. And it's the first one, and it was the biggest one. So, Mr. Ohi, he's down there in 1904. He's the center guy right there, speaks and reads English. Most of the people did not. So, I don't know. Like I say, this guy was a mover and shaker. And he left there in 1906. He got there in 1904, remember. He leaves in 1906 and heads to Eau Gallie and starts a farm there. He runs into William Gleason. We all know that name around here. It's everywhere. And William Gleason is deciding that it's not so bad to have these Japanese guys there. He's got all this land. Again, Gleason was involved in the government. He was basically given land, almost like a nickel an acre or something similar to that. if he would trench it and drain it. That was the agreement. And so he was going to try to build a trench from Lake Washington to the Indian River, is what he basically wanted to do. So people that were sailing up and down the St. Johns River out there could cut across and go up the Indian River. He never got it done. Well, anyway, there was Mr. Owie. Mr. Owie's a clever guy. So he moves to Eau Gallie. He starts his farm up. And while he's in Yamato, he meets up with this young guy. This guy is George Murakami. Now, you may know that name from the Murakami Museum that's down there now. This guy ends up being a millionaire, but he's dirt poor now. And he comes over and is an indentured servant. He's going to work for this guy named Mr. Oki, not to be confused with Owie, Oki. And he has signed a contract where he's going to get such and such wages, and he's going to get such and such bonus at the end of 3 years while working in Yamato for Mr. Oki. Well, no sooner does he hit Florida, Mr. Oki dies of typhoid. All right, so George is in a jam. George does not speak English, doesn't read English, has no land of his own now, and so he's pretty much, stranded. He starts working odd jobs for a number of the little, remember they got the other group there, and he starts working for them for whatever he can get. But he decides, there is no way I'm ever going to get ahead here unless I learn English. So he puts an ad in the paper, I believe, it was in the paper, somehow gets an advertisement out there. We'll work for, English training. And, cheap. Just give me a job so I can work. And a lot of Japanese people did this. They would work as housekeepers and things like that so they could pick up the English language and do it at the same time they were making money. And that's the way they did it. They just, there weren't schools for that kind of thing. So anyway, who picks up on this ad? Somebody from Eau Gallie says, I have my ideas who it was, and if I venture to guess, the Houstons were big boat builders in Eau Gallie at the time. But I'm not saying that was who hired him. So he comes to Eau Gallie and starts working for whoever this family was, and he's there about a month and decides, I can't do it. He says, it's too hard. So he talks to Mr. Owie, who now has a farm out there on Aurora, that if he can come and work with him. And so Mr. Owie said, fine. And so he gives him a little plot of land, and he's sharecropping out there. And somehow Mr. Owie, like I say, this guy gets things done, gets him admitted into Eau Gallie High School. Well, that's not going to go unnoticed. So, remember, he gets up there in about May, and he starts working for the month, so we got June in there, and then we got up to when school's starting in about August. So I'm going to have to get to my papers with this. But I did a lot of research on school board minutes from that time to see what happened, because my dad told me. He said, there was a problem with the Japanese people going to school. And he never really told me what it was. He had said something about, the schools were separated. We all know that about that time, separated by race. But now here they had a new problem. And they didn't know what to do. But they were consistent. This right here, this is a copy of the school board minutes. And here's what it says here. Letter from a patron of Eau Gallie School, number 22. Eau Gallie School was number 22. Relative to Japanese attending said school was referred to the superintendent for further investigation. So the board gets it, they pass it on. The board is unanimously opposed to the entrance of said pupils in the schools of this county. So George hadn't been there but about a week, And so, now that was in the school board minutes. Remember, there's not a lot of people there. I think the school board was in Titusville at the time. But newspapers pick it up. So in August of 1909, after it's been published in the newspaper, this goes up to the school board. We, the undersigned taxpayers and patrons of the public school of Eau Gallie, are willing for the present for the Japanese to attend the public school. And this is sent to the superintendent. And you can see these names. See, here's one of them here. This is the Houston family. This is the guy I said was a boat builder. Hart, you'll hear this name later on in this story. There's a Law Street up there. Mathers, we know about the Mathers Bridge and all that stuff. But there was some heavy hitters. Heavy hitters from, I think, this family here. Watts is one of the teachers that Charlie talks so highly of. Whenever he speaks about this area, he talks about the teachers. That's all he talks about. Okay, so what's the superintendent going to do, right? He's in a rock between a rock and a hard place. The board has already said that no way, we're not going to let this happen. The citizens of Eau Gallie are saying, we got no problem with it, what's up? So, everybody can read that. After the discussion, this is taken out of context, the board yields to the wish of the patrons, but is unalterably opposed to making a precedent of this kind. As soon as there are as many as 10 Japanese pupils of school age, a separate school will be provided for them. So they cut a deal. You know, they say, okay, well, we only got one of them here, right? So what's the big deal? They decide they're going to go ahead and let George stay. And George stays. George probably doesn't even know what's all going on. And I know he stayed because here's his report card. And all signed by E.M. Owie, Eddie Owie. And like I say, so he had something to do with this. He got all excellence and everything like that. And remember, he's sitting in a classroom of fifth graders. But George is 24 years old. And so, but he says at the end of the school year, it was too hard. And he leaves and he goes back to Yamato, where he spends his whole life there, dies a wealthy man. He came up with a lot of good ideas. Maybe it was the one year at Eau Gallie that did it to him, but came up with a lot of good ideas about shipping produce from on the trains. And there's a twist to it. It was a huge landowner. The Japanese tended to want to own land. They invested their money in that. They didn't like putting it in banks. They didn't trust them. They wanted some good old piece of dirt here. So all of them did it. And in Japan, it was hard because there were so many people and so little land. But here, you know, there's just tons of it. So that's what Murakami did. He just kept investing. There was nothing out there but, you know, palmettos and everything. But now look at it, right? And so he made a fortune. Mr. Owie lived in this house. That house is still standing. It's on the, I would say, the north end of Highland. It's got a few architectural, this is not any Owies here. This is not an Owie. They made some changes up there, I think, to make the upstairs a little bit bigger, more usable. But that's where he first lived. But, like I say, Mr. Owie, he can get it done. This is him. He had his wife somewhere in here. He disappears and marries his wife Toyo right here. Nobody was allowed to marry out of race in the United States at this time. So everybody that you'll hear in my story, in case I forget to say it, goes back to Japan, marries somebody there. Usually it was an arranged marriage, brings the wife back. And so he somehow, between the time I started telling you about, he left Yamato at 04 and 06, somewhere he disappeared and went to Japan, came back with that lady there. Got 3 kids. This is Louise, Florence, that's Eddie Jr. right there. This is a wagon, and they got some produce. Here are the local people out. They came to the farm, and they're buying some vegetables from Eddie. And Eddie Jr. Ends up being a lawyer in Miami, was elected a judge down there. This is the junior here now, not Eddie, this guy. That's Eddie Jr. Florence and Louise both, when World War II started, went into the civil service. Eddie went into the Army. He was in the ROTC at the University of Florida. Was trying, begging him, but he was Japanese, and you know they wouldn't let him in. It was right around World War II time. Finally let him in, and I think he spent 4 years in the Army. And that's what he really wanted to do. He wanted to serve his country, as all of them did. They never thought of themselves as Japanese.